Hi everyone, welcome to a new YouTube video. I'm Estelle Designs, both here on YouTube and Instagram, and I like to make fantasy costumes. Today's video is about this dress that I'm currently wearing. We're out in the gardens doing a bit of a photo shoot at the moment, and so I thought I would film my intro. So this dress design is based on a concept art that I saw on Instagram of Sophie Baek from Bridgerton. The pattern is from Mila Oni Patterns, and I just so happened to find the perfect fabric from Bodice fabrics in London when I was over there recently. So if you'd like to see how I made this dress, just keep on watching. So let's get straight into sewing. I'm following the pattern instructions by first sewing this keyhole opening. I use the same fabric as facing, and I don't bother with using interfacing for this because my fabric is already quite medium weight. So as you saw, I sew down those lines and snip down, and then after that I trim my seam allowance and then understitch on the facing side, and that will help keep the facing on the inside of the garment rather than popping out to the outside. I then fold that facing over to the inside of the garment and iron it flat, and then fold under the raw edges and then top stitch that all down for a nice clean finish. The next thing I'm doing is sewing the elastic channels along the waist of this dress. As you saw just there, the yellow markings are in chalk, which are the markings from the pattern of where these channels will go. I'm saving myself some time by using pre-made bias binding, and I'm just pinning that along the whole width of both the front and back panels. I then sew very close to the edge on each side of the bias binding to create the elastic casing. So you can see here, nice clean channels which I can then thread the elastic through. I use the method of a safety pin, attaching it to one side of the elastic and pushing that all the way through. I stitch the ends so the elastic can't escape, and this is the result of one of the elastic channels done. Now onto the pockets. I'm first zigzag stitching all of the raw edges around each of my pocket pieces. So I've got 4 here, 2 for either side of the dress. And on each side seam of the dress, I've snipped little markings of where the pocket will go. So using these snip markings, I'm just matching my pocket up to those and pinning the pocket right sides together to the dress. I then sew along that pin line. Now I'm attaching the front and back pieces of the dress together, pockets included, and make sure that the pockets match up nicely. They should if you use the markings as per the pattern. And I'm just pinning all the way around the pockets as well as down the length of the dress. I sew from the top all the way down to the bottom and make sure to stitch the elastic casings as well, and making sure that those match up as best as possible. At the pocket, I just pivot my needle and then continue along. So the pockets are now sewn in, and it's quite a nice, neat finish on the inside. I did zigzag stitch everything on the inside to keep all the raw edges contained. Now onto the sleeves. I used the same sleeve pattern, but I did cut off the excess length of the sleeve because I wanted to substitute it with this dark green linen fabric. So I cut out my strips and I sewed that to the bottom of the sleeve like so. And I trimmed my seam allowance, and I also folded 1 centimeter of the bottom edge of the green linen and then folded it up to match the where that original seam line is. So I'm trying to demonstrate it here. And then before I actually sew the green part, I'm going to match the seams as seen here and sew down the sleeve so it forms a sleeve shape. And I iron that flat, and then I can proceed to doing the green fabric casing. So I've used an iron to really help guide where my stitching will go and where I need the fabric to be. So I'm stitching just slightly beneath the original stitch line so that the stitches can't be seen from the outside. I also sew another stitch line parallel to that to form some elastic casing similar to the casing on the dress. So I'm trying to demonstrate here how that will look when it's gathered up. So following the same technique of using the safety pin with the elastic, I thread the elastic through and sew the ends of the elastic shut, and that's the cuff of the sleeve. Moving on to attaching the sleeve to the dress, I match the underarm seam to the seam of the sleeve, and I pin the sleeve to the dress right sides together, and I pin all along the bottom of the arm side. I then sew that together. And again, I'm using zigzag stitches to close off the raw edges. And this is what the sleeve looks like from the right side. Nice and clean. So now we're moving on to the neckline ruffle. I'm again using the green linen fabric for this because I like the contrast with the blue. I'm following the pattern instructions and folding in 1 centimeter on each side, and then folding it once over again right down the center to form that bias binding. So this is the outcome. I've got the raw edges folded in under 1 centimeter, and then it's all folded down in half lengthways down the length of the entire neckline ruffle. I then pin this right sides together all along the neckline of the dress, and I'm going to be using that folded edge as a guide for where I need to sew all along the neckline. I then trim the seam allowance of the neckline ruffle as close down to the original stitching as possible, and I also trim down the raw edge on the opposite side to the seam that attaches the neckline ruffle to the dress. So the edges are all nice and chopped off, and now I can proceed to folding over the green fabric over the raw edges on the inside, And to help with keeping those raw edges where they need to be, I'm just using an iron to press them upwards into the ruffle. And then I'm folding the ruffle over the top and then pinning that in place. And similar to how I did the contrasting sleeve band, I'm pinning this just slightly above the original stitch line and stitching slightly away from the original stitch line so that this green stitching will be on the green fabric from the outside and won't be seen, or it won't be very visible. So stitching all around the neckline and getting to the end. And then after I've done that, I also need to stitch a parallel line all along the neckline yet again, and this will form the casing for the elastic. So here's the casing for the elastic all done, and you can see the stitching there is invisible from the outside. I've made my own self ties using the green linen fabric, and I'm going to be attaching this to elastic, so I'll just stitch those together, and I will also sew some of the green self-tie to the opposite side of the elastic. So I'll thread this through the neckline, same process as before, using a safety pin, and this does take a while because the neckline is quite long, and it's also with the linen fabric, it was quite thick, so thicker than if you were to use a lightweight cotton, but this is what I wanted to do, so I struggled through it. So as I'm feeding through the self-tie and the elastic, I have to really work on pushing the fabric down the length of it, and eventually I get to this point where I can tie the two ends off together, and all throughout the neckline is elastic. So the ties are really just at the front for show. Moving on to the hem, I'm folding up the raw edge 1 centimeter, and then I'm folding it over again, and this width is 3 centimeters. So this is following the pattern instructions. So you can see here the 1 centimeter original fold and then the 3 centimeter fold. And then just stitch all along the hemline to finish it off. And that is the dress basically done. I started on making a belt, and I was stitching over this beautiful trim that I was gifted from a friend, but I couldn't decide between the blue and the teal, and then also I just didn't have enough time to do it before I wanted to go out and do a bit of a photo shoot. So I ended up just closing off the edges of this trim, and the way that I secured it around myself for the photo shoot was just with a safety pin. So nothing too fancy there. The belt I probably won't wear with it all the time. It was more just for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, follow me on Instagram, where I post a lot more of my projects, and I've also got my Patreon link below where you can keep up to date with all the real-time progress. Until next time, stay creative.